Okay, well, we'll see if the recording we do here locally, it, actually adds anything, but.
Okay. So if anybody's interested in following through on heat pumps, that's what they're going to be talking about. I was going to talk a little bit about a retrofit club idea that we had talked.
Mute him. Oh yeah, so Aaron, are you figuring out the?
I'm just gonna have everybody sign in, and I'm gonna put numbers on the sheet, and I'll use my phone to roll a random number generator.
Sounds perfect.
Come up with someone in our family, in which case I'll do it again.
All right, sounds fair. So I think so. We've got a couple.
That'll help the SOC out too, because they like people signing in.
We've got a couple people here who can contribute some kind of concrete information on the topic. We were thinking of focusing mostly on heat pumps, not that we can't talk about other things if anyone wants to dive into other topics. But I know that Aaron has done a little bit of research on what different incentives and stuff. So basically how you might get funding help to install a heat pump. And we also have Randy Arndt here, which he's installing a heat pump, 2 heat pumps at our place and my mom's. And so I think Randy seems pretty willing to talk about any of the practicalities of what these systems are like physically. And I know, Hugh, you've installed a system at your place too. So anyway, I'm hoping we can just kind of like chat and Aaron, do you want to?
There's also cookies.
And there are more cookies. Do you want to start off with talking a little bit, and maybe for Byron, you could even stand over here near the microphone. Talk a little bit about heat pump incentives and such.
Sure. So a simple thing is, one thing we have here is we have one at HEA, which I know the most about because I was helping them do it. And so basically that one is, you can get up to $1,000, which is $500 rebate for the homeowner and $500 for the installer. Now, the installer.
Maybe actually, before you get into those details, you might just give a little bit of an introduction to what heat pumps are. And
yes, sure. I forgot that. Well, you asked me.
I know, I understand.
Anyway, basically reverse refrigerators. So you're taking the energy off of the cold air that's outside and bringing it into your house. So they use electricity to run the compressor, but unlike you get a lot more heat out than you would if you just actually put an electric heater in your house. Like you'd get maybe, I don't know, 3 times as much heat per unit of electricity as an electric heater. And here, Hugh has much more specific numbers, and you should ask him for those, but with our oil prices and our electricity prices, it's a lot cheaper to do that than to burn oil. Yeah.
So since you're moving all that air, is that also the house ventilation system? Controls the humidity too, that stuff?
I don't think it does by default, but maybe, I think Randy's gonna answer that one.
Yeah, a heat pump does it, it's set up outside, and when you blow the cold air, assuming it's cold because it's winter, past something that's even colder, you absorb those BTUs. And so they come into the house through refrigerant, and then the refrigerant carries it in the house. And so the heads with most mini splits, and I'm just dealing with mini splits now, it just has a head on the wall, or you can put them on there, and it just takes that heat and releases it. So there's no air exchange taking place at all with those.
Okay.
You need to have an HRV or something like that to do an air exchange and bring fresh air in. So the heat pump pumps heat from outside into the house.
So is it essentially like the wall mounted unit? Is it essentially like a Renai, except that it's...
It looks, yeah, you can do the floor mounted ones. The one we're doing out here are just the head that goes on the wall, a little bit bigger than the thing holding the guitars, but maybe like that size and about that light, and the air just, it takes the air from the roofs, goes through it, heats that air and blows it back into the room.
Okay.
So
yeah, so you'd have to deal with all the like moisture and everything that is still separate.
it's completely separate part of the house. Yeah.
There's 2 distinct types of heat pumps. If you're talking about moving air, then you use a mini split system like what he just described. If you're talking about moving hot water, then you go to a mini block system, a monoblock system, which heats water, not air.
But it can be you can do that with air to water.
Yeah, they're
Right.
called the air to air and air to water,
I
there's
see.
different types,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then you can confuse the air source and ground source there, so it gets
Yeah,
a
yeah.
little complicated,
Yeah,
it's not complicated, but it sounds complicated.
So the water takes the in-floor piping to heat the house then?
Right,
Yeah.
so with an air to water system, you're heating water to 100 to 120 degrees. And you can move water much cheaper and easier than you can move air. So if you're planning on building a new structure, then you should design your system so that it can heat the house at a lower temperature. The Europeans have been doing this for years. When we look at a boiler, back in, say, the turn of the century, or 100 years ago, heat was generated and used, they distributed steam through a system. Then when they developed a way to circulate hot water, then they went to the conventional boiler that we're familiar with today. And it dropped the temperature, say, from 230 degrees down to 180 degrees that they were circulating. It's not efficient to circulate water at 160 to 180 degrees. The Europeans then switched down to heating their systems, their houses, with water at 120 degrees, much more efficient. So with a heat pump, you have to design your distribution system, if you're using water, to operate at 100 to 120 degrees. And at our temperatures here, air to water heat pump basically is 300% efficient.
If you have a in-floor water heating system, can you throw out the gas heater and put in a heat pump and just use the same system?
Yes.
Yeah, that's how you do it, okay.
I mean, that's basically what they did at
Yeah.
Lakeside, except
Uh-huh.
it's not air to water, it's
Right.
it's ground to water or whatever. But
But I ran some numbers on the one I put in. Last November, December, January, and February, the heat pump was the only consumer going through HEA's meter. So I had an accurate number of kilowatt hours. I converted the kilowatt hours over to BTUs. Then I started with oil, figuring the efficiency factor of oil. So I got a number of gallons of oil it would take to get the same number of BTUs, usable BTUs. And at last year's price of fuel, and I buy fuel at 500 gallons at a time, so it's the cheapest rate at $4.57. At that time, the heat pump was 37.9% more efficient than oil. At this year's prices of oil, at $6.03, the efficiency comes out to 52.9%
more efficient
more efficient.
than,
This is
So-
cost wise, so basically this year's prices, it would cut the cost in half.
Right,
Yeah, and by converting to BTUs, you're basically saying that's to get the same amount of heat in your house.
so the heat pump that you installed here, you installed a heat pump
yes,
here in Seldovia?
and
Is
an
it-
air to water heat pump, you're just hooking up two water lines to the unit. You've got the unit outside, and then going from that unit into the house, you use a glycol solution, so it doesn't freeze outside.
What brand is your system?
Pardon?
What brand are you using?
it's Arctic.
Okay, yeah, I've been talking to them, yeah.
So the rebate program, that HEA has, that would be, the homeowner would save $500 or get $500 back on the cost of the unit.
Yeah,
And then the contractor gets $500 as well.
Not
Yeah.
exactly, you get usage, right? So you don't get money back.
That's
You
true.
get
They will give you
$500
the
credit
credit.
with HEA.
yeah.
I see,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, so you don't get cash back, you get, it's kind of like cash,
Yeah,
but not really, yeah.
Yeah.
A rebate on your.
They will give it to you on your bill, so.
Yeah.
So I feel like some of the people that could use this the most are people who aren't gonna be able to pay the upfront cost of a heat pump. Is there any program out there that's helping
Well,
homeowners put one in?
right now, HEA has a loan program that does not just for heat pumps, it's for any electric appliances, solar panels, heat pumps, anything you want that's electric. That's like up to $10,000, and that's basically a loan, right? And they'll do that. I do know that, Scott mentioned that AHFC, so in the Inflation Reduction Act, there are all kinds of rebates that it varies, like the ones that are for low income people especially can get up to like $8,000, and but exactly how that program is going to work isn't known because the state has to build it, right? So there are two things that are true right now is that there's some federal income tax credits and then there's HEA's rebate, and there are potentially much bigger rebates for all kinds of retrofits, not just heat pumps, but a lot of the other stuff Scott was talking about. But nobody has any details yet because each state has to make and administer a program and design the criteria. And I guess that AHFC is probably going to do it, but they haven't done it yet. And so we won't know the details. So yeah, and the HEA one, the contractor part, basically it's just the idea behind that is to incentivize, people to do this kind of thing as a business. So it can be the same person, but if you want to be the same person, you have to have some kind of license as a plumber or a contractor or a general contractor or something. Yeah.
I mean, in most of these systems, my understanding is it's not a homeowner sort of situation anyhow, because you have to do the Freon.
So that's for the air to air ones. Yes.
Yeah.
What you did with the air to water, you don't have that.
You don't
stuff.
have that same stuff.
Yeah.
With the air to water, it's no more complicated than looking up a hot water heater.
Right.
So it depends on which kind.
So just so you know, that's the only system like that. The rest of them require dealing with, because all my ground ones do water. And so, but they all require refrigerant. So the Arctic heat pumps is the only one that I know of right now that does.
There's one more. I think there's also, so there's Arctic, and there's the one that Mark Houston in Anchorage has been advocating.
Well, I think you brought a key point up. It's the monoblock ones that put the whole unit outside, that basically then you have to use, it's a little more complicated because what you have to do is you have to use glycol or methanol or some kind of mix that doesn't freeze, that allows you to take it outside. Then you bring it back inside. And if you're using a radiant floor system, you can use that same one. But if you're trying to get domestic hot water or something else out of it, you have to use a heat exchanger. So because you can't mix those two items.
Right.
So yeah, it sounds complicated, it's not, but there's just a lot of options. I actually use something a little bit different in that I don't necessarily like radiant floor systems because they're very expensive. And what ends up happening is most houses, if you're doing a good job of building a house now, and it's very tight and very efficient, you can actually, you need an HRV anyway, because the house is tight, so you're moving the air anyway. So what I do is we have the Life Breath makes something called a clean air furnace, and it actually uses potable water. So we use the heat pump to do your domestic hot water tank, and then we steal heat from that while moving the HRV air anyway. So the HRV air moving actually heats the air in the house. But you do it at 300 or 400 CFM rather than 1200 like you have under a normal. But it doesn't work in houses that are not very efficient. So if you have a 50,000 BTU load on your house, it's not going to work very well. But if you can get into 20 and 30, 35,000 BTUs, you can easily use a system to do the same thing. And so what I've found is that I quit doing the radiants because it's just very expensive. And I know you save money with the pumps because you use ECM pumps and everything else, but if you did a good job on your house, now you have to add on top of that this fresh air, because you asked about that whole concept. You need to deal with a tight house. You now have to deal with the moisture. You have to deal with the fresh air. And then the other part is somebody asked about the filtering system. So if you're building the system, you filter the air with Life Breath makes something called a whole house filter, and there's huge filters there that you can go HEPA. I mean, hospital level filter. So everything that's moving all the time is constantly being filtered. So there is nothing in the ducts. The ducts are clean because you have a nice large filter that you pull out. So depending on what you're trying to do, there are multiple levels. Like you're doing the basic level where you're just taking air and moving heat in. Then you move, each step goes a little bit farther. And there's multiple ways to do this. And so your options, depending upon what you need, are huge. And it sounds like did you put your own system in then? Did you do your own system? Yeah, see, so your question then is, do you have to have that? No, if you're going to do with Arctic heat pumps, you wouldn't have to have somebody do it. You do your own plumbing. If you're going to do and I've done this before, I've had people put in mini splits and I come over and pull the vacuum and release it because it's already in the system. So I pull a vacuum after we put the heads and stuff in, and then we just release you don't have to add anything, it's already in it. But if you start getting bigger than that, then you have to add the refrigerant, and it gets quite a bit more complicated.
So I don't mean to.
Go for it.
Yeah, but like what's a range for startup model of the air to air? What's the range of costs to buy the unit? And then what's the range of cost to install it?
Well, they're usually running, depending on what's going on. Every install is different. So
Of course.
you're normally in the 5,000 to 6,000 for a smaller unit. You start getting the bigger units, and you start getting more. So with a mini split, you can go, depending on where you are and how it's going, say $4,500 to $6,500
For the unit itself.
just air to air.
Yeah.
But is that including install?
Yeah, that would include the installation too. Yeah.
Yeah, so can you break it down between what the actual unit
Well,
costs?
it's a little harder because what ends up happening, you don't know what unit you're putting in.
Right.
All this, another thing that we run into is with a furnace, you can throw a 90,000 BTU furnace in a house and you can heat any house there is. Heat pumps don't work that way. They got a very narrow range that they do. So you have to find out what the load on the house is, how many BTUs it requires at the temperature, and you're like us in Homer, so it's 0. We just use the 0 design, and then you either have a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 BTUs required to heat at that temperature. You don't use that all the time. It's cold, whatever. So then each one of those units that you buy costs different.
Right. No,
So if you're going to buy a boiler system, you know exactly what that is, but you don't know when you're building. So you have to look at a house, and you have to figure out how many BTUs, and he did a good job. He knows exactly how many BTUs it takes to heat his house. It's kind of nice to know. But there are ways to do that. You can hire people to do that, and there's a variety.
There's also, and this is, as good as you could do for an online calculator, but there's a online heat pump cost calculator for Alaska that lets you put in details about the size of your house and the kind of construction of your house, and what your current system is, and various things like that, and it'll spit out like kind of the cost comparison, and also give you like the payback time. So like, okay, go buy this, how many years will you basically will take to pay for itself. And when you do that, like, one of the reasons we've decided to talk about heat pumps here is that we have the same electricity prices as the rest of the Kenai Peninsula, but we don't have the same fuel prices as the rest of the Kenai Peninsula, which makes it pencil out much
Much
more
faster,
easily
yeah,
here and
right.
much faster.
With the air to water system, you do not have to have radiant in the floor. You can get radiant panels.
Just like in the old
Yeah.
steam ones.
They're like
Right.
radiators.
Radiant panels, and you can get them, say, from 2 feet to say 4 feet
But they're
long.
designed for low temperatures, so.
They're
yeah,
designed for low,
They admit better, yeah.
You put them down on the floor like a whole radiator.
yeah,
Around the
just
room.
like the
Yeah.
old fashioned radiators.
Mhm.
And they also make units that look like monitors. They got ones, I mean, you can pretty much go anywhere. The Europeans have some, a company called Jaga makes them, their artwork on the walls. I mean, there's just,
Right,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
get as far into this, some people heat their bathroom with they run water through a towel warmer. So that's how they heat the bathroom instead of a register or anything else. You got a towel warmer that stays warm and your bathroom's warm and, you can do, so you can do whatever you want.
Right.
Yeah, I think that this fellow I I think he's installing some, far rural systems. He lives in Anchorage. I'm pretty sure his name's Mark Houston. And he's using a system similar, not the same brand, but similar to Hughes, but he goes in and goes to a blower unit on the inside, so it's air to water to air,
yeah, right.
And his argument for that was centered around reliability, because he was installing these in places where they aren't necessarily going to have it's not going to be easy to find someone to repair any issues or anything. And so he was kind of trying to zero in on like, what is the system that would have the least chance that it needs,
Maintenance.
kind of expert maintenance.
Right.
Yeah, I got, it's just basically, it's one question, it's two-part. What is the longevity and what is the maintenance?
You want to take that one, Randy?
Yeah, the longevity is very similar to boiler. So if you buy into one of these, the mini splits we're putting in are good for 10, 15 years at least. Maintenance is a little more we were just talking about this, it would pay if you guys over here start wanting these things, that somebody in town takes the bite, gets trained, so that you guys can have somebody here that does this. There's no reason for somebody from Homer to have to come over. You don't want to pay somebody to come over.
And the training is essentially is dealing with the freon, with the.
Yeah, the refrigerant part, yeah, and it's not as difficult as you think. You can take tests and you can do, I mean, you probably could get trained good enough to run this off of YouTube videos, because they have classes on it. But you have to get a certificate, but John Stone and some of these other guys, they'll test you. And once you got their certificate from the EPA, you can get the refrigerant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had one set of tools over here, vacuum pump and some gauges and some other things, one person could. Mm-hmm. But what I have found, and knock on wood, is that once you get them running, you don't have to mess with them. You just don't. And so, there's a filter, like some of these, like the ones you guys are getting, there's filters up on the top, which you take out and clean. And then you put them places where the snow can't blow, and you're putting underneath things. Because in the typical Alaska snowstorm, it's gonna pack it. If you're outside, it's gonna pack that thing down to work, because there's no airflow. So you treat it like a baby a little bit, protect it, and it'll work just fine.
And you can put it like in a crawl space or something?
Yeah, well, no, not a crawl space. It needs under decks. That kind of thing. You can put them on out wall. You've seen pictures go online, they mount them on walls, get them up out of the snow. People in Homer on top of the hill want to put them in. I say, well, you gotta have them 4 foot off the ground. You can't have them there, and then you need to protect them. So I usually end up putting them under a deck or somewhere where there's airflow through. There's not a snow issue. So did you build a box for yours?
Hugh is his name.
Did you build a box for yours, or what did you do with yours?
There's no need for a box. You're making it too complicated.
No, I'm not.
The air to water is so much simpler than air to air.
But for your exterior unit, how do you protect it from getting clogged by snow?
It's setting on the deck, and the thing is about that tall, and there's nothing there for the cover. I mean, the snow slides right off, it doesn't even hit it.
Put it on the windy side of the house, snow doesn't stay.
So.
Here's the
to-
picture of it.
Yeah, to answer the air to water issue, in your guys' case, you're now then going to have to change how you do things, because you're gonna have to add a bunch of other things to the water system. That's why the mini split for people who just want heat, it works. If you wanna get bigger and fancier, if you're not heating a yurt, you're starting to get into this. It makes a lot of sense what he said. In fact, I'm selling those now too, so, because every house, as I said earlier, every house has a different thing. There isn't something that works for everybody. It just doesn't work that way. And so there's people that want to get in early, people who want to get in a little farther on. I mean, and you start out, the cheapest systems are, say, 5,000. You can go to 30,000 on a system. Most people can't get there or do that. And so that's a very rare system that gets to be 30, and that's a ground source usually. And it's water, and it heats the whole house, does the whole thing, and your domestic hot water and everything on top of everything. So it's how much money you want to put into something.
Yeah, the way I've been thinking about it is that, you know, for people who have a Toyo, like the mini split is kind of a really straightforward replacement for a Toyo.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can
they're
take
also-
the same numbers that Hugh came up with
Mhm,
and apply them to your monitor.
mhm, mhm.
And monitors are notoriously very efficient and do really well. You know, some of them are at, what, 89% efficiency and stuff. So you're starting to take that and you can cut that bill even, which is what most of us want. We want something that's efficient and easy to deal with it. And, you know, you can put it anywhere you want, you know, as long as you're gonna spend the time.
Meaning you could keep your old monitor,
Yeah.
but just then run the heat pump and displace some of your.
You don't have to sell it, you don't have to give it away, you don't have to do anything, you just leave it there.
Mhm.
I mean, we're planning to leave the wood stove where it is in our house for backup, you know. I don't know that how often we'll use it or not, but we aren't gonna take it out.
Well, I think it's the concept of what we're trying to do. We're trying to use something that's efficient, that works for you. And Hugh has taken his on his own and made it work for him. But that's not everybody's house. And so there's a wide variety of things, and you just figure out what works for you. It's not.
It all boils back to, you've got to have an efficient building to start with.
Yeah.
If you put the money up front in your insulation, then it doesn't take that much to heat it.
So we do have a winner, but is that Mary Ann? I don't know or what does it say at the bottom there?
What number is it?
Number 11?
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice.
We couldn't quite read your signature there. But here anyway, this our door prize, and we can tell you how to use it if you want. Is basically a thing that you can set up on all. You put it in put these things like clip to the wires in your breaker box. It's easy to do. You don't have to like be an electrician or anything. We followed the instructions and did it. And then there's an app, and you can like see what all the circuits in your house are doing
Oh, yeah, cool.
at any time.
I think it does require Wi-Fi, so you do need Wi-Fi, I think, to make it work as intended.
That's great.
Do you have Wi-Fi internet in your
I do.
home? Then you should be
Then it
good.
should work great.
So you plug it into a 20 amp circuit? Is that, or how much electricity does it
Yeah,
use?
I bought a little unit that I'm gonna put on just that system.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm gonna go ahead and say goodbye to Byron and some other folks who are hanging on here. Thanks for joining us here in Seldovia, and I do have a recording of this here. Let's see here. Yeah, there was a question from Byron about it, direct hot water, but I think that got answered. Is that right, Byron?
Oh, and I never finished.
You can
saying-
unmute and
I did
talk
never
there if you
finish
want.
saying.
So does your air-to-air mini split also heat your domestic hot water over?
Not in our case.
No.
If it's
No,
just
they're
air to
called
air.
air to air, so they're moving heat from outside to hot air.
Right. So how are you doing that? Are you using propane, Hig, or not
No,
bothered?
we're using on-demand hot water heaters. So we've got
Electric ones.
electric on demand, and so we have 2 of those in our place.
And then, you know, back to Randy's point that every house is different. Most of our hot water isn't even in the same building that we live in. And so doing it together might make more sense for some people than it does for us, where we basically don't even really heat the building where most of our hot water is.
Right. That's a great point. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for this, Hig.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Byron.
Yeah. One thing that I guess I meant to say that I didn't is that in addition to HEA's thing, another thing that is already set up is that the federal government has, and this is just a kind of ongoing program, has a energy improvement federal tax credit that you can apply for, and it's currently up to, I think it's like a $1,200 cap, but next year it'll be higher. It'll be a $2,000 cap, and that's like 30% of your costs for anything, pretty much anything Scott talked about, and heat pumps. But that one is not refundable, so unlike the rebates, you may or may not qualify for it depending on how much money you make. It'll only be against your tax liability.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.